Hey everyone, and welcome to Code One Digest, the channel where we break down complex development topics into simple, easy to understand pieces. If you're just getting started with Docker or passionate about learning Docker, DevOps, cloud, and programming, you're in the right place. You've probably run into two terms that seem really similar, the Dockerfile and Docker Compose, and this is a huge point of confusion for beginners. What's the difference? Do you need both? When do you use one instead of the other? If you've been asking these questions, don't worry. In this video, we're going to digest this topic and make it simple. I'll give you a clear, straightforward explanation of what a Dockerfile is, and then we'll dive deep into what Docker Compose is and how it's different. And we're not just going to talk about it. We'll build a real multi-container example from scratch so you can see exactly how it works and why it's so powerful. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly when to use each one. But before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to Code One Digest and hit the bell icon so you never miss out on our upcoming tech tutorials and deep dives. All right, let's break it down and understand Docker Compose versus Dockerfile explained in the simplest way possible.
Here is the simple analogy. Dockerfile. This is the recipe to bake one cake. That is your application image. It lists all the ingredients, like a base OS, code, and dependencies, and the step-by-step baking instructions, like copy, run, Docker Compose. This is the event plan for a party. It doesn't bake the cake, but it coordinates multiple items. It says, we need one cake, built from the recipe in Dockerfile, a bowl of punch, that is a database image, and some music, that is a caching service. Then connect them all so people can get cake and punch at the same time. In short, Dockerfile, a recipe that builds a single Docker image, what goes into the container. Docker Compose is a YAML file that describes how to run multiple containers together, how images are wired, services, networks, volumes, env, and scaling. Later, I'll explain each, show a concrete example using simple Node web app plus Postgres, and call out the important differences and when to use which.
Let's understand what is Dockerfile. A Dockerfile is a plain text file that contains a set of instructions, commands, on how to build a single Docker image. Think of it as a blueprint for creating one container. When you run the docker build command, Docker reads the Dockerfile and executes the instructions in order, layer by layer, to create a final runnable image. Key components of a Dockerfile. From specifies the base image to start from, for example, Python 3.10 or Node 18. Work directory sets the working directory inside the image. Copy copies files, like your application code, from your computer into the image. Run executes commands to install dependencies, for example, run pip install -r requirements.txt. CMD provides the default command to run when a container is started from this image. For example, cmd python app.ypy. What this does is it creates a single image that contains Python, your app's code, and all its dependencies ready to be run. Starts from a base image, Node 18 Alpine, copies dependency manifests and installs packages, copies the app sources, defines the default command that runs inside the container. Use case. You need a reproducible image for one service, web server, worker, database image customization, etc. Dockerfile is how you create images. Now, let's understand what is Docker Compose. Docker Compose is a tool for defining and running multi-container Docker applications. It uses a YAML file, by default docker-compose.yml, to configure all of your application's services, networks, and volumes in one place. With a single command, Docker Compose up, you can create and start all the services from your configuration.
Today, most real-world applications don't live in a single container. You typically have a web server, a database, and maybe a caching service. Docker Compose lets you define this entire application stack and manage it as a single unit. Docker Compose defines a multi-container application, which images or services to run, volume mounts, networks, environment variables, dependencies, scaling, restart policy, and more. Example, docker-compose.yml that starts the Node app and a PostgreSQL database. Key components of a docker-compose.yml file. Services, the main section where you define each container. Image, specifies an existing image to use. Example, Postgres:14. Build, tells Compose to build an image from a Docker file in a specific directory. Ports, maps ports from the container to your host machine. Volumes, persist data like database files outside the container. Environment, sets environment variables. Docker Compose up command will create a network for the services as shown in sample, mount the volume DB data, ensure DB starts before web via depends on, and stream logs from both containers. Use case when your application includes multiple components, web, DB, cache, message broker, worker. Compose is the easy way to run them together for development, testing, or small deployments.
More Compose features worth knowing. Environment and .envir. Compose supports .envir file and env file entries to inject environment variables. Volumes. Persist data, for example, DB storage. Networks. Compose creates a default network for your services to talk by name, for example, DB hostname. Scaling. Docker Compose up scale worker equals 3 to run multiple replicas, useful in dev. Profiles. Starts subsets of services, useful in Compose v2+. Secrets/configs for sensitive data, supported by Compose with Docker Swarm or v2 features. Restart policies. Restart unless stopped, always, or on failure. And health check. Compose can define health checks for services and depends on can be tuned to wait for health. Here's a side-by-side comparison between Dockerfile and Docker Compose.
How Dockerfile and Docker Compose work together. Actually, you don't choose between Dockerfile and Docker Compose, you use them together. You write a Docker file for each custom service in your application, like your web service. You write one docker-compose.yml file to describe how all your services, like web and DB, fit together. In your docker-compose.yml, you use the build keyword to tell Docker Compose, go find the Docker file in this directory, build an image from it, and then run it as this service. For other services, like the database, you use the image keyword to pull a pre-built image directly from a registry like Docker Hub. In short, Dockerfile builds the image and Docker Compose runs the image, along with other images, to create your full application.
When to use which? Write a Docker file for each component you want to containerize: web app, worker, custom service. This is how you make portable images. Use Docker Compose when you need to run multiple containers together: local dev, CI integration, small staging. It's an orchestration tool for multi-container setups. For large-scale production deployments, you might move from Compose to Kubernetes, Nomad, ECS, or similar. Compose is excellent for local dev and simpler deployments.
For those interested in hands-on exercise for Docker Compose containerized development, I've created a comprehensive tutorial that walks through configuring a full-stack environment. The video Node.js application and PostgreSQL database setup with Docker Compose, the step-by-step full-stack app setup tutorial on the Code 1 Digest channel demonstrates how to efficiently set up a Node.js application and a PostgreSQL database using Docker Compose. This guide details the step-by-step process of using a single docker-compose.yml file to seamlessly run and integrate a Node.js application with a PostgreSQL database in separate Docker containers.
Extra tips and gotchas. Dockerfile is image build time. docker-compose.yml is runtime configuration. Don't confuse build time environment, arg, with runtime, env. Keep secrets out of docker-compose.yml. Use environment variables, Docker secrets, or a secret manager. Compose file version numbers exist, for example 3.8, but the Compose spec is evolving. Check your installed Docker Compose version when using newest features. CLI difference. Newer Docker integrates Compose as Docker Compose, no hyphen. Older versions used Docker Compose.
Quick summary. Dockerfile is how to build an image for one service. Docker Compose is how to run many containers together, wire them, persist data, and manage lifecycle.
Thank you for watching. If you found this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the Code One Digest channel for more insightful content on programming and technology. Don't forget to click the bell icon to stay updated with the latest video releases, and kindly share this video with your friends and colleagues who might benefit from it. This information is especially valuable for students, beginners, and software engineers. I truly appreciate your support. Your likes, shares, and subscriptions motivate me to keep creating quality content. Thank you once again for being part of the Code One Digest family.